let's go ahead and get started, folks. All right, thank you all for coming. This is our second annual India Forum. The number one goal of this event is for everybody to get to know everybody else. We really want to provide the opportunity for the community in India to really come together, meet all of your peers, your colleagues from different companies so that you can work together, as well as some of the folks from the Linux Foundation that help support the project for OpenDaylight. I want to start off with a few shows of hands. So who in the audience currently are contributors to OpenDaylight? Hands? Okay. And who in the audience are committers? Okay. We have a few. So, and again, raise those hands nice and high, because these are the people you actually want to come talk to, okay, who know how to get things done inside the community. We have another very special guest, Anil Balur. Anil, please stand up. So Anil is the latest addition to the OpenDaylight admin team and release engineering team. So he's around, he works out of Brisbane, Australia, but he's the guy that's closest to your time zone. When something breaks inside the build system, that's the guy that's normally answering the call. All right? So if you want to go say hello to him at some time over these next 2 days, that might be a good thing for you as well. I do want to thank our sponsor, Huawei, who sponsored our lanyards. All right? And again, our goal here is to really get everybody to talk. Now, similar to last year, we've got a general track session and we have a tutorial session for beginners. And we also have an additional hands-on lab set of sessions, all right, for those that want to dig deeper into any given topic. Out of curiosity, who in the room is going to be attending the beginner tutorial sessions? Okay, very good, very good. And who's going to be doing the hands-on labs? All right, excellent. And then we have a series of general sessions that will continue to stay in here in the grand ballroom. We've also set up a series of slots for tomorrow for what we call unconference, okay? A common thing that happens in open source projects is we just provide an opportunity for people to come together on a given topic. You might have had a hallway conversation on it, and you want to kind of dig in deeper, maybe get some other folks involved and just sit around a table and think on something or hack on something. So we have a set of rooms tomorrow afternoon, starting shortly after noon. We'll have the availability for folks to come in and just do that and work together. All right? Now, I guess maybe I should introduce myself. I'm Phil Robb. I'm the Senior Director of Technical Operations for OpenDaylight, and I also help the Linux Foundation and some of our other networking projects as well. And what I'm going to do here this morning is just kind of level set everybody, do somewhat of an introduction on OpenDaylight, as well as a little bit of a current state of the union on where the community and where the project is. I thought this might be helpful for everybody. This isn't information that everybody often gets, so just to level set everybody on where we are, I thought that I would do that. Additionally, all of our sessions today are going to be recorded, so if you really wanted to go to 2 different sessions and you have to pick, it's okay. If you miss something on a track, you have the ability to actually watch that presentation at a later time because, again, everything's going to be recorded. Similarly, wherever you go back to, if you saw something interesting, within a week or so, we'll put all these up on YouTube. You can point those to your colleagues as well so that they can take a look at the different sessions. All right? So, again, I'm going to go through OpenDaylight overview real quick, talk about some of the use cases we're seeing, and talk about our governance and getting involved. So, real quick, again, since we have some beginners in the audience, OpenDaylight is really about being somewhat of a Swiss Army knife for network programmability. All right, be it for automating services, network resource optimization. We have a lot of use cases around cloud and NFV in particular, as well as just network visibility and control. This ends up being part of a stack that we're seeing grow. Many of these components are in the Linux Foundation, of an entire open source based stack of foundation code that we're really building the next generation of networks on. We have now projects that are doing orchestration. We have several projects that are working specifically on NFV. We have multiple projects now that are doing orchestration, as well as continued work inside of the switch domain with OpenSwitch, OVS, FDIO, and so forth. If you take a look at this set of open source components from a stack standpoint, we end up with pretty much something inside of the open source world for every different layer of the stack, and in many cases we have multiple projects. Multiple projects, particularly at this stage of where we are with discovering what we need to do for these next generation networks, is actually a very good thing, right? People will often ask me about, compare ONOS versus OpenDaylight. Well, ONOS is very focused on OpenFlow, it's very focused on white box switches, and that particular model, the most pure sense of SDN in separating the control from the data plane, so you can really put white box in the data plane. Again, OpenDaylight is really constructed more of as a very flexible platform, more of a Swiss Army knife. There's lots of components. You pick which blade you want to use for what task you have at hand. And we'll show some of those use cases that we've ended up with different users going towards using vastly different componentry as part of that OpenDaylight platform. We look at this where there's actually a variety of different ways we now need to look at the network, right? Setting up policies, managing them through a policy view, looking at it just from a service and end-to-end service view, the virtual topology, and obviously the physical underlay that's working within that, and then, of course, the resource view, right? For OpenStack and for network function virtualization, certainly looking at CPU, memory, and storage capacities are always important. Bandwidth is one of those that's been missing, right? And OpenDaylight and the rest of this networking stack are intended to give that better visibility, as well as be able to break out those different views and facilitate the ability of analyzing and managing your network from those different views. In a fundamental sense, OpenDaylight is constructed in this manner, right? We have external applications working through a REST interface. We have lots of internal services and applications, and they're all talking to each other through an abstraction layer that is really it's providing two things. It's providing a common data store in a common language, which we use as Yang, as well as a messaging bus and a messaging system doing RPC, doing notifications, also through the Yang interface to allow these different services to talk to one another. We've evolved over the 3.5 years that we've been an open source project to the point where being model-driven through a Yang interface is what we've chosen how we want to manage this coding effort and this runtime environment. Meaning that you define what your application or your service or your protocol plugin is in Yang. You run it through a set of tools that we have called Yang tools that puts out an API and a framework then that you actually add the code, and using this service abstraction layer with this common data store and this common messaging system to actually allow these different services to talk to one another. Again, we've been around since April of 2013. The names of our releases are tied to the periodic table. So we started with hydrogen, then had helium, then lithium, beryllium, and we just released boron at the end of September. So active development is going on right now, and release plans from the 80 so projects that we actually have come together for a simultaneous release. Their release plans are starting to be due tomorrow for Offset Zero projects. So some of the comments that we've heard about OpenDaylight over the last year include these that are on the screen, right? OpenDaylight appears to have the project with the most momentum. Chris Rice from AT&T, we like OpenDaylight's breadth of brownfield protocols. And you can read through all of these others. Point being is we continue to gain momentum as a project and as a community. We always do a survey annually when we're about to have our conference, which we had again in late September. Our top use cases or top considerations from end users for open source projects used are these. And I guess that's a little bit small for you, isn't it? But OpenDaylight leads with 65% of those end users who are looking to deploy a network virtualization or SDN solution, looking at OpenDaylight to do that. And then a very similar set of numbers for those that are actually in deployment. So when I came here last year and we had this conference, we had a variety of different users who were looking to go into POC. We really didn't have very many going into production. Now we actually have OpenDaylight in production, as well as many different companies actually embedding it inside of their products and or just selling OpenDaylight outright and providing support for it. If we look at the landscape of open source networking controllers, OpenDaylight continues to lead with commits. Pretty much, again, anything you want to measure an open source project on for a community and a code base, we are leading the way. We are well past, we're approaching 1,000 developers that are contributors to the project at this point. This slide was taken a few months ago, and at that time we had 696 contributors at the point. Now we're actually over 800. But you're looking at about 2.6 million lines of code, mostly in Java, well-established, lots of year-over-year commits. And if you do a COCOMO study, for those of you who, there's a tool that actually can analyze a code base for its complexity and number of lines of code, and both determine its complexity as well as how long it would take to actually write that from scratch. And it's about 764 years for OpenDaylight as a project. So, who in the room has worked on an open source project, or hasn't rather, worked on an open source project before OpenDaylight? So OpenDaylight was your first open source project? A few folks. I mean, one of the things that I'm always surprised by, and this was the most interesting thing recently said to me by one of our end users who has begun to become active in OpenDaylight. And I asked him, what's the most interesting aspect of your organization working inside of the OpenDaylight ecosystem? And his comment to me was the fidelity of communication between the guy who actually runs the code and the guy who actually writes the code. So, you know, if you think about what it's like to actually work through a vendor, and when you're just a software developer working inside of your organization, you know, you don't really get to talk to that end user very often, the guy who's actually going to go use that code. You talk to your engineering management, right? So when a user has a request or a need for some piece of software, he talks to his sales rep. Actually, he talks to his management, right? And his management talks to the sales rep. The sales rep talks to his manager, and ultimately it gets to product marketing, who then finally accumulates all of the user's requests and needs, sends that down to engineering as a PRD, and eventually the developer then gets something to do, right, based on his engineering manager. Right, well, that entire chain of command or chain of communication has the opportunity for dilution of what the real needs are with each one of those steps. You know, when we get folks from AT&T and Verizon and China Mobile and KT and all of our telecom users who are the first to really engage, you know, they have members that are part of this community, right? And they have the opportunity, and many take that, and I encourage you to take that same opportunity to talk to them, right? And get a direct line. What do they need? What do they see? What are they really after? And that's that increase in fidelity of communication that this user was describing to me, right? He's never had the opportunity to talk to the guy who was going to write the code and have a discourse, you know, over a period of weeks. And I watched one example on IRC where one of these users said, you know, hey, I need feature X. And he described how it should be implemented. And the developer said, you know what, that would be a really hard way to do it, and it would take a long time if we were even going to try. But I could give you this alternate version, say X prime, how would that do? And that wouldn't take too long at all. And the guy came back and said, well, that would be good, but it's still not quite perfect. Could you also add this set of information along with that? So he countered with X prime prime, right, as the suggestion for the feature set. And indeed, that was still easy to do, and it ended up getting implemented within a week. That's the type of conversation that makes open source work between developers and vendors so key and, quite frankly, superior. So talking about end users, we've got a variety that are actually leading projects now. AT&T came forward with their Yang Design Studio. We have several transport PCE users engaged, packet transport, and you can see transport is a theme with our telecom friends, and packet optical transport with KT and ETRI, and then Cable Labs as well as Comcast working on PCMM and EMAN. Just to keep everybody abreast on what we're doing, OpenDaylight started, and we announced this at our summit at the end of September. We now have a powered by trademark, right? So having a core set of functionality defining what your version of OpenDaylight has, meaning that a vendor who's providing a solution or a product that's based on OpenDaylight, and we really started with just the core. It's really just, it's even a subset of the kernel projects for those that are engaged in the community and know what we mean by offset zero or kernel projects. It's really a subset of those. And so it's not really yet a certification that says, you know, here's a specific set of APIs that are available, but rather it means that it's a set of core functionality that you know will work. So if you're going to build a service or an application external to an OpenDaylight controller, you know that that these vendors have at least started with this very core basic set of APIs, like MDSAL, like Yang tools, like ODL parent, or Palm parent rather. But you have a core set of functions. Now we intend to continue to grow this over time to a more rich and more stringent set of certifications. But we wanted to start with some stake in the sand as to, you know, this is the beginning, and this is the core set of OpenDaylight that you can count on as being part of a vendor's product. We want to continue to increase our oddlugs, so our OpenDaylight user groups. You'll notice that Bangalore as well as Delhi are two of the largest populations that we have. So thanks to you guys for continuing and sharing your work amongst yourselves. It's one of the reasons why we chose to do a forum here, to allow those different communities to come together in a single place, get to know one another, and work. Over the next couple of years, you'll see us really try to build out these user groups. Getting more individual geographies together with users to share information is something that we want to do as a community to really grow and scale the project, right? It's obviously hard for people to come to different events on a global scale, and we want to be able to provide that same information more easily digested and continuous over time to a lot of different geographies at the same time. So you'll watch us, the OpenDaylight Project nonprofit, continue to invest in really building out our user groups. And I look forward to talking to folks here on what's worked for you, what hasn't, what you need, what the foundation can actually do to help you to continue to grow your user groups here. Real quick, again, from a State of the Union standpoint, here are our members. It's a wide set of members, and the interesting thing to me over the last 12 months is the number of end users that we've started to get. When I was here last year, we didn't have any end users that were members of the nonprofit, but we're now getting folks like Comcast, like China Mobile, like AT&T, who are making strategic investments in their roadmap, with OpenDaylight being a key piece of the technology that they plan on using. So as we get more entrenched inside of these users, they're coming to us and are becoming members. Real quick, I'll go through some of our use cases. This was part of the survey that we did in November. That's a really tough slide to read. Believe it or not, but on that right, there's actually a globe map. And let me read it to you. So 33% of our users are actually out of North America. We got 19 in Europe. We have 30 in Asia. 3% in South America, and 1% in Africa. So pretty much we're a third between the US, North America, Europe, and Asia. And a significant piece of that is China as well as India. 19% of those folks are new service creation. 27% are network monitoring. 28% are NFV and cloud, and 26% are traffic engineering. And my apologies, that slide didn't translate too well on our projector. One of those use cases, we actually have Microsoft, IT. So this is not Microsoft selling a piece of software or service, but this is actually them using it internally as part of their IT department. They've got lots of different employees all over the world. They really wanted to move to a model where, if it can be done just over the internet and not within their private WAN, they wanted to be able to do that. And they're actually using OpenDaylight to manage that traffic. Avaya and InnoCybe together are working on a solution for the Veterans Administration in the US to actually do IoT. Again, this is one of the plugins that have come to OpenDaylight, not really related to SDN, but rather because the controller sits and can see everything on the network, we have IoT plugins doing IoT protocols to actually be able to collect data and send that upstream to different analysis applications. And so this is another application being used out in production that is with OpenDaylight at its base or at its core. CERO is an organization that's done several different solution deliveries in Europe. They do a lot of satellite work as well as WAN work. They're using OpenDaylight in these 3 different use cases. And I mentioned AT&T before. Not only is AT&T using OpenDaylight as a controller for their existing environment with Netconf and BGP and Yang, but they've decided that their entire Domain 2 concept is really built around Yang modeling, even to the application level. So they use OpenDaylight as an application controller as well, as part of, embedded within their eComp orchestration and OSS/BSS, to be honest. It's a pretty hefty project. If you haven't seen in the press, AT&T intends to open source eComp, and they expect that sometime early in 2017 that will come out as another alternative for doing orchestration. And then at Comcast has taken the work that was originally started by Cable Labs around PCMM to actually manage the set-top boxes and the devices that are close to the edge of their network through OpenDaylight by adding a plugin to be able to do that set of protocols. In addition, they also wanted to do energy management, so they started the eMan project. So Comcast continues to drive forward with the use of OpenDaylight. China Mobile, using OpenDaylight to really consolidate and manage a variety of different vendors' equipments through their Aero project. And then Tencent is just now moving, I believe, out of POC, starting to deploy in their environment. And Tencent, for those, I expect most folks in the room who know who Tencent is, but they're a very, very large internet over-the-top provider in China. Similarly, Alibaba, with their sales sites, also very large, also in late stages of proof of concepts, moving to deploy OpenDaylight in their network. So I want to talk a little bit about the governance and, again, state of the union of the technical community of OpenDaylight. So first off, the way OpenDaylight is run and the way most Linux Foundation projects, and certainly all Linux Foundation projects where they're started from scratch within the Linux Foundation, we have a few different principles that we consider really important. One of them is an arm's length relationship between the nonprofit and the actual technical community. And that's very important because corporate agendas with different organizations trying to get a leg up within an industry, trying to, if you're used to standards organizations, for many, many years, we had standards organizations where things would just get blocked. If there was an organization who had a competing technology to the one that was kind of leading in a standards effort, they would do everything they could that can be done, and certainly things can be done within a standards environment to actually block that technology from becoming a standard. Those types of corporate interests within open source projects, as a best practice, we really try to extract them, right? So Having a technical community where the meritocracy, the merits of individual developers, how good they code, how good they communicate, how good they lead their projects, these are things that the rest of the technical community, you folks, value, right? And then you show that through your voting these members into leadership positions and trusting them with leadership positions in that technical community. And it is divorced from any given corporate activity, right? That's a best practice for an open source project. There are a variety of those, and that's a good part of my job is to make sure that we actually work on those, and it is truly a level playing field. It doesn't matter if you're a vendor or a user. It doesn't matter if you're a small organization or a large organization. If you bring good technology forward that's valuable to other folks that's inside of that community, it gets adopted and it gets used, right? That's really the way we're trying to run these open source projects. So OpenDaylight is its own nonprofit. They pay for events like this and folks like me and Anil to actually manage that community, all right? And the board of directors of that nonprofit make sure that we're doing marketing, again, all of the infrastructure to make the project work, the communication out to the industry as to what we're doing and why on earth we're doing it. All of those things are part of the nonprofit, right? Whereas the technical community is led by the technical steering committee, which is a set of elected folks coming from the community. I'll talk a little bit more about that later because we're in the middle of that transition right now. So OpenDaylight itself is an open source project, but we actually have many, many sub-projects within. There are currently about 80 projects, to which somewhere between 50 and 60 go into any given simultaneous release. We will release about, right now, our average has been 7 to 8 months, is how quickly we can come out with a release. That's really built around a 6-month cycle, but when you take into account different vacations and holidays that happen throughout the year in different geographies, we end up having to extend it a little bit. I mentioned before that we have the concept of offsets. So we have offset 0 projects, offset 1 projects, and offset 2 projects. A rough correlation of those are, we have a series of kernel projects on which everything relies. Things like that model-driven service abstraction layer, that is a project. Yang tools is a project. Again, the way we actually organize all of our projects and how they have interdependencies is through the Palm Parent project. And so these are kernel projects, and we call their offset 0. And the idea between an offset 0, 1, and 2 project is as we're doing a simultaneous release, we have milestones, right? You have to say you're going to be part of a release, you have to have a release plan, you have to have a feature freeze, you have to have a code freeze, you go into testing. Well, for all of the other projects in OpenDaylight, those kernel projects need to get done first. And once they get stabilized, we usually give somewhere between 2 weeks and a month for the offset 1 projects, who rely upon those offset 0 projects, to then complete their milestone dates. And similarly, and the offset 1 projects are, by and large, our services and our protocols. So services that are used by other applications, and then the protocols that are often used by multiple applications. And then finally, offset 2 projects are those applications. So you'll see when you get involved in one of our releases that we have a release plan and we have these milestones and with offset 0, 1, and 2. That's what they're for. Briefly, just the difference between a committer and a contributor. So contributors, anybody can bring code, right? You can bring code, you can bring a bug fix, and by the way, again, working in this technical community in any way, shape, or form, becoming whatever you want to be from a reputation and an influence standpoint, that's strictly up to the individual. Meaning that you don't have to have a company that buys for some membership in the nonprofit to actually ascend inside of the technical community. Again, that's another best practice of keeping that nonprofit separate from the technical community. But when you start to work with OpenDaylight, you contribute code or documentation or a test, many different ways to contribute. They're all very valuable. I encourage everyone in the room to do lots of them. But you start off by being a contributor, and through that work, ultimately you can then request from the projects that you're working with to actually become a committer. Contributors can submit code, but the only people who can actually merge code into that code base are committers. So that's an important role. Additionally, the committers of all of these different projects will elect a project technical lead. All right, and the project technical lead is the person most responsible to the release manager, who currently for OpenDaylight is an individual by the name of Ann Ho. But those project technical leads are those that are most responsible for their project to interact with the rest of the community, the technical steering committee, as well as the release manager to make sure that things get done on time. So as we hit those milestones, there are a series of artifacts that need to be produced with each milestone. And so the project tech lead, again, is voted in by his committers and represents that project and is responsible for those artifacts getting delivered to the rest of the community. So I wanted to end with just kind of talking through, I wanted to end just kind of talking through some of the current events that are going on inside of OpenDaylight. Something going on right now that is about to close is our technical steering committee elections. Again, when we launched the project 3.5 years ago, because it was a brand new community with a rather substantial code base to start, we needed a technical leadership team, but we didn't have any existing technical leaders because everybody was coming together for the first time. So we decided as a group that the platinum members of the nonprofit would each elect one person to the technical steering committee. The logic being that those were the organizations both who were bringing forth the most amount of developer resources, because they all had to bring forth at least 10 developers as part of their platinum membership, but also they were contributing the code. So they were the logical people to help lead the project. So we started off with just those technical leads. After about 1.5 years, we added committers at large. So we added 2, and now we're at 4 committers at large. So the entire committer population of OpenDaylight then votes for committers to represent them into the technical steering committee. And that's the way it's been for the first 3.5 years. But we always had in the bylaws of the nonprofit that when the community got to the point of being mature enough, that those designates from the platinum members would be removed. Okay, and early this year, in March, the board said, we want to do that now. We think the community is mature enough. We want to remove our platinum designates from the technical steering committee. And funny story, they actually wanted to do it in that board meeting in March. And I went, I got no way to populate a technical steering committee right now. If you guys just pull out, what do I do? So they gave us some time, and we've had a dialogue going inside the community for the past 6 months, actually, on how should we form a technical steering committee. And in the end, we came up with the idea that each one of those represented groups, or we had a series of rather represented groups, and those groups are the kernel projects, or offset 0, the services and protocols projects, or roughly offset 1, and the applications, offset 2. And then in addition, we have a series of support projects, those that are doing tests and a variety of other and sundry things that keep the project running smoothly, but aren't actually part of the release or actually part of any one of those 3 categories. So in each one of those 4 different represented groups, there will be 2 technical steering committee members out of each of those groups. And then in addition, we're going to have 5 committers at large. Okay, so all of the committers will vote for those 5 committers at large, and each one of those represented groups, the kernel projects, services and protocols, applications, and support projects, their PTLs will vote 2 PTLs in from each of those projects to be part of the technical steering committee. Those 5 elections are going on right now, and again, they end Thursday, midnight UTC. So sometime about 8 a.m. or so here on Friday morning is when they will end. and I'm always shocked at how well I do time conversions. I travel too much. So that's a big thing, right? Again, that's something brand new for the project. It'll be the first time that we've seated a TSC that's strictly voted in from the community, and we're all really looking forward to that. Committer member elections. So something else that was done about 18 months into the existence of OpenDaylight, so sometime around the end of 2014 or 2015, was we started having committers who are voted in to represent that technical community to the board of directors. Okay, and again, we have this synergistic relationship between the board of the nonprofit and the leadership of the technical community. This is another one of those liaison roles. They are full members of the board. They vote. They're not just observers. And it's about time to have that election as well. Again, as soon as I finish with the technical steering committee elections, I will be starting the committer member elections. We're doing a lot of talking about changing, or in particular accelerating our release process. We have a variety of projects that live downstream of us, OPNFV being one of them, that heavily rely on us, right? We're also, OpenO is going to be the same way, eComp is going to be the same way. So these are larger projects that need to consume OpenDaylight to put their next release out. And for this release between Carbon of OpenDaylight and Danube, which is the next release of OPNFV, I can confidently say that our time synchronization is as bad as it could possibly be. All right? Danube is going to release at the point that we're hitting RC1. All right, so we'll be just finishing a release, won't be ready, they won't be able to consume it because they're coming out with Danube. So they're going to have to wait 7 or 8 months, right, for a final version of what they would use, and of course then they'll be on to the next release. So trying to shorten our releases as well as working more closely with our other projects are activities that are important to the OpenDaylight community and things that this new TSC, as they get on, this will be one of the things that they will be discussing straight away. I mentioned earlier that we're really wanting to invest in the OpenDaylight user groups or oddlugs, as well as the concept of ODL days. And we may change that for here next year, it depends. But we're setting up where we actually work with the local user group and do similar to what OpenStack has started doing, going around to different geographies to get more information disseminated out to more places more quickly, is having a day long of sessions, technical sessions and or tutorials, just one day that are focused around a user group. And so that may very well be what we do here in Bangalore as well as Delhi and possibly other user group geographies inside of India. We're doing this, one of our first ones is actually in China. That will be the week of the 12th of December. And George Zhao is helping to lead us. He's sitting back here in the room as well. Actually, George, stand up. Being one of our leading community members, I want to make sure everybody knows who you are as well. So George was OpenDaylight's release manager to start, and now he helps with a variety of community activities, again, not the least of which is starting up a series of 5 of these OpenDaylight days that we're doing over a week's time in China, starting in early December. Thanks, George. So again, working closer with these related projects. OpenStack is another one that we continue to struggle with, quite honestly, as a community. Making sure that OpenStack and OpenDaylight, between both Neutron and a new project called Gluon, syncing better and working more closely with those projects is important to us. Again, OPNFV and OpenO, as I mentioned, are projects that are consuming us. We want to work better with them as well. Working better with SDOs. So we've come to the realization that we're probably one of the largest Yang users right now and creators of Yang models in an actual production environment. So having a more tightly integrated relationship with those that are actually standardizing these Yang models is going to be good for us. We have a variety of activities going on in the community right now where we're having to modify our Yang models based on the standards organizations creating new standards that we need to keep up with, but we don't really have much of a voice as a project inside of those standards organizations. So improving that is something that's important to us. In general, just making it easier for developers to actually join the projects. For those that are in the room that have gone through that learning curve, you know it's non-trivial. We want to continue to make that better. And anybody who's interested in working on that, I would be very happy to work with. This is something that we know to be able to continue to grow our community at the scale and the rate that we want to. This is important to us. And then similarly with users, right? Having a series of tutorials is one of the things we're working on, but continuing to make it easy, continuing to keep up with tutorials that we put out that make it easy for users to actually write their first application, understand the environment in which OpenDaylight runs, and actually the fact that even though there are 80 projects, no controller that you're going to actually deploy is ever going to use, but a small fraction of those projects, right? So understanding that, understanding how to pick and choose what you need, putting that together, all of that we want to continue to work on good explanations. Oh, yeah, let me go back. And then finally, just making it easier to deploy, right? Clustering, federation, migration, and updates. These are all things as a project we lack at. So these will be areas that the technical community is focusing on. Many of you in the room, I'm rather sure, are already focusing on several of those aspects. This will be something that's important to us. It is important to us, and will continue to be one of our leading motivations or leading activities that we'll be doing over the next couple of years. Getting involved, for those in the audience that aren't familiar, again, we have the user groups, and we have OddLug, OpenDaylight.org/OddLug to see what's there. We have an OpenDaylight advisory group, and for everybody in the room, we meet the third Thursday of every month at 8 a.m. Pacific time, so 8:30, 9:30 p.m. Here. But we have different users talk about what they're trying to do, what successes they've had, what challenges they've had, and these are all basically leading architects in a variety of different user organizations. We have a few financial services folks now. We have a lot of telecom folks, and it's great feedback. If you want to understand what these folks are trying to do and where they're having difficulties and where they're having great success, it's a very good meeting to actually partake. We have meeting minutes that we do, and we've started recording recently these sessions as well. So you can look out the recordings if you aren't able to actually attend in person. And then, of course, we have a series of mailing lists that you can subscribe to based on what projects you're most interested in. All right, so with that, that concludes my presentation. Again, for those that are doing the beginning tutorials, that's in the Neptune room that's over here. The Jupiter room that's back behind me this way, that will have the hands-on labs. Lunch will be, we'll end up sitting in here for lunch, but it'll be served right out here in the foyer area. And then at 6:15 tonight, we also have a reception, again, for everybody to just mill around and talk, and that will also be right out here. Again, I want to stress, anything that you want to learn, if you don't know who to talk to, come talk to me, and I will find somebody that is in our audience that can help you, or someplace else in the community if they don't happen to be here. But I strongly encourage you, take the opportunity, meet as many people as you can, understand what they're doing, share what you're doing. Okay, again, if there's something you end up wanting to hack on together, think about doing an unconference, and work with registration for securing the room out there, securing a room tomorrow afternoon to do that unconference. But otherwise, again, this event is really about everybody in this room being able to work together and get to know each other. And with that, we'll have 10 minutes to break off into different rooms, but I greatly appreciate your attention. Okay? Thanks, everybody. So, real quick, again, since we have some beginners in the audience, OpenDaylight is really about being somewhat of a Swiss Army knife for network programmability. All right, be it for automating services, network resource optimization. We have a lot of use cases around cloud and NFV in particular, as well as just network visibility and control. This ends up being part of a stack that we're seeing grow. Many of these components are in the Linux Foundation, of an entire open source based stack of foundation code that we're really building the next generation of networks on. We have now projects that are doing orchestration. We have several projects that are working specifically on NFV. We have multiple projects now that are doing orchestration, as well as continued work inside of the switch domain with OpenSwitch, OVS, FDIO, and so forth. If you take a look at this set of open source components from a stack standpoint, we end up with pretty much something inside of the open source world for every different layer of the stack, and in many cases we have multiple projects. Multiple projects, particularly at this stage of where we are with discovering what we need to do for these days, that might be a good thing for you as well. I do want to thank our sponsor, Huawei, who sponsored our lanyards. All right. And again, our goal here is to really get everybody to talk. Now, similar to last year, we've got a general track session and we have a tutorial session for beginners. And we also have an additional hands-on lab set of sessions, all right, for those that want to dig deeper into any given topic. Out of curiosity, who in the room is going to be attending the beginner tutorial sessions? Okay, very good, very good. And who's going to be doing the hands-on labs? All right, excellent. And then we have a series of general sessions that will continue to stay in here in the grand ballroom. We've also set up a series of slots for tomorrow for what we call unconference, okay? A common thing that happens in open source projects is we just provide an opportunity for people to come together on a given topic. You might have had a hallway conversation on it, and you want to kind of dig in deeper, maybe get some other folks involved and just sit around a table and think on something or hack on something. So we have a set of rooms tomorrow afternoon, starting shortly after noon. We'll have the availability for folks to... Let's go ahead and get started, folks. All right, thank you all for coming. This is our second annual India Forum. The number one goal of this event is for everybody to get to know everybody else. We really want to provide the opportunity for the community in India to really come together, meet all of your peers, your colleagues from different companies so that you can work together, as well as some of the folks from the Linux Foundation that help support the project for OpenDaylight. I want to start off with a few shows of hands. So who in the audience currently are contributors to OpenDaylight? Hands? Okay. And who in the audience are committers? Okay. We have a few. So, and again, raise those hands nice and high, because these are the people you actually want to come talk to, okay, who know how to get things done inside the community. We have another very special guest, Anil Balur. Anil, please stand up. So Anil is the latest addition to the OpenDaylight admin team and release engineering team. So he's around, he works out of Brisbane, Australia, but he's the guy that's closest to your time zone. When something breaks inside the build system, that's the guy that's normally answering the call. All right? So if you want to go say hello to him at some time over these next 2 days, come in and just do that and work together. All right? Now, I guess maybe I should introduce myself. I'm Phil Robb. I'm the Senior Director of Technical Operations for OpenDaylight. And I also help the Linux Foundation and some of our other networking projects as well. And what I'm going to do here this morning is just kind of level set everybody, do somewhat of an introduction on OpenDaylight, as well as a little bit of a current state of the union on where the community and where the project is. I thought this might be helpful for everybody. This isn't information that everybody often gets, so just to level set everybody on where we are, I thought that I would do that. Additionally, all of our sessions today are going to be recorded. So if you really wanted to go to 2 different sessions and you have to pick, it's okay. If you miss something on a track, you have the ability to actually watch that presentation at a later time because, again, everything's going to be recorded. Similarly, wherever you go back to, if you saw something interesting, within a week or so, we'll put all these up on YouTube. You can point those to your colleagues as well so that they can take a look at the different sessions. All right? So, again, I'm going to go through OpenDaylight overview real quick, talk about some of the use cases we're seeing, and talk about our governance and getting involved. Next generation networks is actually a very good thing, right? People will often ask me about, compare ONOS versus OpenDaylight. Well, ONOS is very focused on OpenFlow, it's very focused on white box switches, and that particular model, the most pure sense of SDN in separating the control from the data plane, so you can really put white box in the data plane. Again, OpenDaylight is really constructed more as a very flexible platform, more of a Swiss Army knife. There's lots of components. You pick which blade you want to use for what task you have at hand. And we'll show some of those use cases that we've ended up with different users going towards using vastly different componentry as part of that OpenDaylight platform. We look at this where there's actually a variety of different ways we now need to look at the network. Right? Setting up policies, managing them through a policy view, looking at it just from a service and end-to-end service view, the virtual topology, and obviously the physical underlay that's working within that, and then, of course, the resource view, right? For OpenStack and for network function virtualization, certainly looking at CPU, memory, and storage capacities are always important. Bandwidth is one of those that's been missing, right? And OpenDaylight and the rest of this networking stack are in